Really wish we could jam.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy 4th of July weekend. This is July 6th, 7th.
Yeah. Happy
7th.
late 4th of July.
Yeah. Happy late video day. Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man.
So, for those of you just tuning in for the first time, this is Aaron on guitar,
Howdy.
vocals, bass, everything. I'm Randy. I'm at Ovation Music and Studios here in Gallatin, Tennessee, and we are going to discuss some music. Today's topic is reeling in the years for all you fishermen there.
Yes, this is this is by my favorite band of all time. So I will have maybe too much to say. So you can feel free to hey, rein it in. But Steely Dan for about a decade now has been my favorite band. I just keep liking more. I don't know. I can't shake it.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I think everybody has to have favorites. It's good that we're doing some of your favorites.
Well, I think so.
Because I get to learn new stuff. Because I had never learned anything by Steely Dan until you said you wanted to do this song. I was always aware of them. They fall under a weird category for me. Steve Miller falls in the same category for some reason of bands that I can probably sing half their lyrics with the songs playing, but I have no idea what songs they play.
Right. Well, sorry, here's a spiel to already get started. I know. Well, Reeling in the Years is probably one of the bigger hits, right? If not the biggest hit by Steely Dan. It's way up there if it's not the biggest. And like almost all their songs, lyrically, it's kind of like a short story turned into a narrative, and that was kind of what he was going for with almost his entire career. Most of his songs were he tried to take the form of that and turned it into and so that's why I remember someone telling me about the song Black Cow by Steely Dan off the album Asia, and they're going these lyrics are so weird, what is he talking about? And then you look at the lyrics and it's not that there's anything high art talking about it. There's plenty of stuff from lots of genres where you go they're just word painting, silhouettes of broken mirrors, the color red makes me think about yesterday. It's nothing like that, but some people hear lyrics like that and they go I don't get it, but it's word painting. But Steely Dan isn't really most of Donald Fagen's stuff isn't really that. It's more it's kind of matter of fact, but uses language that you would read in a short story. There's metaphor or there's stuff in there, but it's pretty straightforward. And the song Reeling in the Years is basically I don't know, boiling it down, just my impression of what I remember it thinking of is kind of it's three little mini stories in each verse about how people react to nostalgia. One at a lover's nostalgia, about time spent with somebody, college, or about higher education, or someone thinking that they were, destined for greatness because of how much of a genius they were. And then the first one just about summertime, youth kind of stuff. Every verse has a little bit of talks about nostalgia and what the
that's kind of the base topic of the whole song, isn't it? Are you reeling in the years? Are you being nostalgic? Are you remembering this?
Yeah, and it's kind of nostalgia, not being great, or not. It's not necessarily completely damning it or anything, but it's definitely.
Now, I have to be honest. I find these guitar parts so interesting that I really didn't notice that the song had lyrics.
I mean, that's what's kind of cool. That's what I loved about it. Because when I first listened to it, I didn't listen to the lyrics at all. I was I just liked the big chords I was hearing. I was
yeah, and I know a lot of these lyrics just from hearing the song over and over again. It's not something that you wouldn't have heard if you exist on this planet in a first world country. You would have heard it at some point, whether it's walking through a store or casually hearing something on the radio or background track at a sporting event. It's been used a lot.
Absolutely.
You may not recognize it. I find this is one of the Steely Dan songs. I find, that's Steely Dan. This is probably one of the few. Everything else, I'd be Is it Steve Miller? Is it Steely Dan? I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. It's so horrible. I feel bad. I'm sorry, Steely Dan fans. Don't
No,
attack me today.
on behalf of all Steely Dan fans, we forgive you. No, I know there's a little bit of like a cult of anything when you get to a band like Steely Dan is certainly
Well,
not.
Steely Dan's not really a band though, is it? It's just two guys.
Well, the songwriting was, yeah, Donald Fagen was the keyboardist and the vocalist for the majority. In Can't Buy a Thrill, they had a different vocalist on a couple of tunes.
Okay.
But most of the hits,
Had Walter, what's his last
Walter
name?
Becker.
Becker.
Walter Becker passed away about 5 years ago, I think, and he was kind of like, if Donald Fagen was the keyboardist and the vocalist and like had a lot of the harmonies, like Walter Becker was like the guy that came up with the guitar parts that sounded cool and like arranged them and
the cool bass lines.
In the cool bass line. So he was kind of like, because Donald Fagen I don't think was principally like a string player in any way, like Walter Becker was able to take what Donald Fagen was doing harmony wise and funky groove wise, apply that to the strings and the rhythm section, like to the guitars and bass. So they made a pretty like great duo for, a full band kind of sound.
Well, let's jump into some of these elements then, because we've talked about some ideas of lyric content and groove, and this is definitely a song that represents that stuff. But it kicks off with guitar playing, man, which that's a good way to get my attention.
Yes. The guitar player's kind of like he quotes the melody at the very beginning in like a very guitaristic way.
Yeah. Kind of, there's a few rhythms there that I struggle with because he's playing with this 16th note triplet fill and he's going back and forth between it.
Yeah.
And so what he's doing here, this whole solo, is he's taking this idea of this. Here's the beat, and then you can play triplets over that, or you can play 16ths over it. And then he's displacing the rhythms by not playing the first note of the rhythm and just interweaving them very fluidly. Not something I do a whole lot of. So I found it a lot of fun, and I got into that opening, and I probably listened to that 300 times and didn't even listen to the rest of the song.
Oh no, my camera. Sorry, my
Freeze.
phone. Yeah, I'm gonna have to stay on this one.
But that's like a G6-9 or something. I did hear that in the chorus. It's kind of a weird comping pattern that I didn't really practice. So I'd love to take
it's not in the guitar part anyway. That's you're right. Like that's a keyboard part that happens to be playing that sound.
No wonder I can't play it.
Well, so like that opening guitar solo, it's like in the higher octave there. It's doing what the vocal harmonies or like what the kind of the top note of the chorus is. So it's kind of like quoting it just for that very, very first part, and then it just goes into a string of just jamming over that G and then A chord. But the chords, yeah, like you said, like you can call it a G6-9 kind of chord.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then up well, it's interesting because that solo, the intro solo, is the same as the like chorus of the song. It goes over the same two changes, and it's got there's two different parts, right? You've got this, which you won't be able to see my fingers as well now, but you do have this chord, and it's not even the bass note isn't there. You have like an electric piano playing. And this is one of the two sounds that is Steely Dan, what they did for rock and roll's harmonies. Like there's that particular chord, which even though you can look at it as a G6-9, it doesn't, that chord name doesn't give you the full picture because the vocal harmonies do something different on top of that, which does the other staple like signature sound of Steely Dan harmony, which I recorded a little bit of it just to share it, which I thought.
Yeah, let's hear it. Share with us.
I just did it real quick before we came in, so apologies. But you'll hear. Can you hear? Are you really in the years? So you can hear that years chord there. You hear that.
You have the suspension on top.
Well, see, it sounds like it would be a suspension. What the vocal harmonies are doing there are the top note moves down while the other two notes stay the same. And what happens is that top note moving down turns that chord it hangs on there at the end. That sound right there, that is a D major chord on top of G. So while it's playing a D. Right, and this chord is the most consistent sound that Steely Dan does that a lot of other bands did not do. The opening of Green Earrings does this chord. Josie does it throughout the verses. I can name a million Steely Dan songs. Oh, not a million. I can name a ton of Steely Dan songs in which they play a major chord and they put its fourth in the bass. And that, or some people would call this a major 9 removed third, whatever you want to call that. That particular sound is, when I think Steely Dan, I think that chord, which it doesn't happen on the second part of it. But essentially what happens is you have these vocal harmonies singing the "Are You Reelin' in the Years?" It moves from an A chord to a B minor chord to an inversion of another A chord. So it's just A and B minor triads until it hits that top part of years, in which you hear over G. And so you'll hear the vocal harmony parts are singing a B minor triad over G. And then when that top note moves down, it's a D triad over G. So really, when that top chord is there, it's like a G major 7. But then when that top note moves down and the others remain the same, you end up getting this, you get this D chord over G. And
that makes it sound, because I'm hearing it as a suspension, it is sort of, I don't want to say more correct, but the ear is definitely, the ear is hearing the D as the tonic.
Absolutely.
Even though when I try to finger this chord or play it, I instantly think I wouldn't call it a G chord with a 9, made a G major 7 add 9.
Yeah.
Or
well,
G,
you can. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Major 7 sus 2. If you don't have the third in there, I don't know if the third exists in another part.
The only part that is doing the third of it.
Is he doing?
Actually, there's no third on that chord.
Isn't the bass player doing some kind of walk up thing? I can't remember. I forgot. My brain blanked on me on this.
But either way, there's like, you have a piano doing that chordal sound, this, and you've got harmony parts singing that on top of it. And you'll hear, like, if you hear the harmonies kind of one at a time, the top one. Are you reeling in the years? You'll hear the top one stays there. The second one goes. Are you reeling in the years? You hear how that one stayed. The one below it stays the same. And then the one below that one also stays the same. Are you reeling in the years? Now, all that, if you notice when it lands there, it just feels like just a D chord. Like it feels like just a major chord at the end. Like, oh yeah, it's just a D chord there. But because there's a G bass underneath it, are you reeling in the years? You can hear it has this very, it's a very wide kind of, because that third isn't there. That's a sound that Don Fagen on numerous stuff talks about. It's like, yeah, that harmony was something that we thought it was less jazz and more rock and roll because it didn't have the third.
It didn't have the third. The third takes it from being a jazzy thing.
Right, it would feel like an extension. You know what I mean? Like,
ironically, when we play with the third in jazz, you get you get the major 7 chord. You get this big. and you'll have the third in it, and then the soloist doesn't play that. The soloist will play the flat 3 over the top of it. And you'll get this chord, and you'll get a line like that with the minor thirds over the top of it. They'll like superimpose both thirds. Whereas in rock music, we tend to just delete the third entirely. And I would totally agree with Donald Fagen on that by deleting the third, they definitely made their sound more rock than jazz.
Yeah, it's the same thing if you've ever heard the song Peg by Steely Dan. The
That
part
solo is amazing.
It's another great solo, but that first chord, that same chord is what's in that. And of course, Peg was on Asia, but Peg has that. I seen your picture. I keep it with your letter.
That C major 7's first chord.
It's a C major 7 that goes to that G chord, like the same thing that's here on Reeling in the Years.
All right.
And, he takes that through a 12-bar blues. But yeah, that was another example of him going like, I want to play a chord that has the feeling of like these notes that turn your ear a little bit, but
absolutely.
But he didn't want to make it go straight into necessarily like.
Yeah, but he's not. I wouldn't call any of what I hear on the Steely Dan as out. Nothing sounds like bizarre to my ear. It's not uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, that's all part of good arranging too. I think put it in the right place.
Uncomfortable in the sense of it sounds like there's wrong notes, like some people hear when they listen to jazz. I don't hear any of that from Steely Dan where I go, oh, that's a wrong note.
Yeah, I think the harmonies that people associate in jazz, particularly like that, would be like Lydian sounds and Lydian dominant sounds. But those things do happen even in their. There's a song called "Fire in the Hole," which is like from "Can't Buy a Thrill," in which he opens the chorus with a Lydian dominant chord, and you don't even notice it's there most of the time. You don't even realize it's that big of a harmony, because the arranging happens to put it in the right place.
Which is Lydian is ironic, and that's going to lead us to a whole nother topic. But for those of you who don't understand what we're talking about here, we're talking about that sound you hear at the intro to cartoons mostly.
Yes.
That's Lydian dominant. It's basically every cartoon theme song in the world almost.
That's a hot take.
That's a hot take. Simpsons is just
I would
Simpsons.
say the Simpsons,
And the Jetsons, right? Jetsons Lydian dominant.
I don't even know if Simpsons is Lydian dominant. I think it's just Lydian, but I don't.
But same idea. So I'm that super happy but uncomfortable happy. I find it to be an uncomfortable happy.
No. Yeah.
Steely Dan's not doing that though. He's just no thirds. And I love no thirds.
Extensions and no thirds, and the first part of it's
rock, man. He's a punk rocker.
well, I mean, they definitely liked punk elements in a couple places, but I wouldn't say it. Yeah.
No, they fall. I think they fall. I think Frank Zappa said it best. They fall as under rock music, and sometimes they are progressive.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of people call them progressive rock, though I think they're more pop rock. Just fancy about it.
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I'm a big fan, so.
We're just looking for the hot takes. Aaron refuses to give a hot take on anything.
Well, it's a band I really like, and if there's a band you really like, I struggle with trying to call them of this genre. It's like Stevie Wonder's R&B. It's like, no, Stevie Wonder's Stevie Wonder. So I feel the same way about Steely Dan. I go like, yeah, Steely Dan. Some people call it yacht rock, where they put Kenny Loggins and Michael McDonald and Steely Dan in like a thing together. So, and I get why they say that, for some elements.
The mood is similar. Yeah. I think the general mood and the fan base is similar, the overall fan base. Yeah. But yeah, Kenny Loggins uses all the thirds, man. I mean,
well, I mean,
he sounds country.
I don't know enough Kenny Loggins to be honest with you. What I've liked, I've heard, but but yeah. So like the intro here, we have one thing to note in the harmony parts
Are
too.
you really
So it's got like it does that chord, but then when it goes to the A chord,
stolen away the time?
so when it goes to stowing away the time, it actually does the vocal harmonies sing like an A major triad there. It goes from a B minor over A to an A, like it feels like a suspension, like
That's going that.
exactly. That's the exact voicing of it too. So when it gets to that A chord, it
Yeah.
feels like an actual, like, it's an A chord, and no, not messing around. And in that one, you'll notice the other two voices actually do come down. So it's interesting in that, like, it's a harmony part in which the top voice does the same thing every time, but the bottom voices go up the first time, and the second time they go up and then fall back down. And what happens is, like, it gives you the feeling of the first chord having like a lot of tension, but like that cool extended no third feeling. And then when it gets to the A chord, they give you the A chord in the harmony.
And I love that. If you're
And
going
with
to use the suspension to suspend the whole thing, just all the notes.
yeah,
They'll all go up.
it's
Piano
just
players, would piano players just write it as two separate chords though? Write it as a B minor over A to A.
well, it's at some point, it's like uh, the vocal harmonies do one thing, the keyboard does another thing, because the
Yeah, the
keyboard
keyboard's
is
still playing that sixth chord.
yeah, the keyboard is still playing the chordal part on top of that. So
What's the
there
bass
is
player
a
doing?
B natural and a C sharp. What's that?
What's the bass player doing? Because we got to give the bass players a little bit of power here. They do get to name the chord.
Well, they land on the root. He lands on the root, and if he's going to do a fill, in this case, it ends up being, for the most part, major pentatonic. Although I wouldn't say he uses the whole thing. The bass player is mostly just staying on the roots, and I would need to listen to it to hear every little thing of what the fill is. But for the most part, it's just going. And
Yeah.
if you have a fill, it generally like falls into all of these chords, like what the keyboard player does and what the vocal harmonies sing. They all can be kind of grouped into what I would call like modal soup. Like you could say the song is like, oh, it's a G6/9 chord, but the vocal harmonies are singing a D major triad, and a G6/9 chord does not have an F sharp in it. So it's like
Yeah.
so it's really like something that you can give it a name, but the name of the chord is only as helpful as the instrument you're currently talking about. Otherwise, you can just look at the entire picture as being something that is like it is this mode in which they're all kind of playing in.
Yeah.
And they're describing different emotions.
I do think like a piece like this, it would be very difficult to just read it on a piece of paper. I think it would have to be something that I have to listen to or work with people to learn. Um, and that's advice I'll give to all you guys, man. Just because you can see it on a piece of paper doesn't mean that's the right way to play it. Just because you can write it on a piece of paper doesn't make the performance the right performance.
Yeah.
In the classical world, I would say that that's 100% true. The composers take the time to make sure that everything is written as exactly as it possibly can. But in rock music, it's different, and we want to go for, and part of it is feel. Um, I don't think they cut the click. I didn't get the impression they cut the click. It feels like the tempo's moving.
Yeah, the chorus
Um,
feels like it speeds up a little bit to me.
you can write that on paper, but not correctly. So when you guys are learning songs, don't forget to listen to them. And even if you're learning classical songs and you are playing by the piece of paper, listen to people who interpret the music properly and know what they're doing. Makes a
For sure.
huge difference. Luckily, with rock music, everybody writes their songs and plays them, so you get to listen to exactly how they wanted it to go.
There you go.
At least I haven't seen Donald Fagen say anything that Steely Dan's recordings were not what he wanted and they didn't go the way they intended. It seems like they
No.
were pretty diligent in their process.
Yeah, they had great like producers alongside of them. Is it Gary Katz, I think, and a couple of guys that like kind of obviously they had a vision, really strong one, but they also were able to like just like a TV show, they had good casting directors for their bands.
Yeah, and good writers, man.
So it's it kind of gives you that feeling when you listen to it. There's a deep amount of talent in every player that's on this track for sure.
Yeah, and so form wise, we get an intro and then it jumps straight into the chorus, right? Or does it go,
Well, no, it goes into the verse.
goes into the verse?
Hmm.
We just
Yeah,
talked about the chorus. We went into the chorus.
yeah, that was my bad. I just wanted to point that out. But I love the verse too because the
It
verse
goes into
is
this is a little D walk up thing.
yeah, and they're kind of like they're like tenths. Like the spacing is a tenth in the key of A. It's going
Okay.
like diatonically up tenths from like an A, B minor, C. Well, and then more like an inversion of it. But you can see or at least you can hear that part like in the piano or keyboard part. I forget which part exactly has that, but generally that first part you have tenths. The feeling of tenths moving up is like the main driving harmonic idea, and those tenths come back down. And there's even a little, there's like a little bit of motion in there, but they're mostly tenth intervals off of the root, which would be a major third or a minor third above whatever the root is doing.
Which
And the
is
root,
funny because my ear was really attracted to the higher pedal note. And there's this A that's like drifting over the top of everything the whole time. And I'm not sure exactly what, I didn't quite get the rhythm right, but I feel like I kept hearing that A just hold over. Maybe it's a harmonic that I'm hearing hold over the top or a microphone placement thing.
there might be. I can't. This was a very quick. I threw down things. I don't necessarily claim to have every single part, so there is a chance that would fit, and it would fit well. But there's like it does that
Hey,
little.
man, that intro, it was so easy to spend like 4 hours working on that intro. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it's a pretty
So
fun guitar
I
solo.
started to get into the second part and then picked out some of the bass lines. And that was kind of, and then I was out of time, man. But
Yeah,
this is one I'm going to go back and learn all of it. There's this really cool dual guitar solo we're going to get to here. So this
for
verse,
sure.
let's go back, focus on here. We got these tenths.
Yeah, so he does the first part. Your everlasting summer, you can see it fading fast. So you grab a piece of something that you think is gonna last. Well, you wouldn't know a diamond if you held it in your hand. Things you think are precious, I can't understand. Now, I'm not playing it perfectly in time. I was just kind of showing the chords with where the melody is.
Oh,
But you
yeah.
have like this walk down from the 4 chord down to the 1, and it's a tenths walk down from the 4 to the 1 diatonically. Does that twice. And then on the next part, it goes to like
Five
what
minor.
an E minor. Yeah, it's like the
Yeah.
5 minor. It's almost like a miniature key change to that one, where it goes to the 5 minor. It's like now we're in E minor for just a moment. We play the root, or sorry, the third and the fifth of its 5 chords.
Seven diminished, yeah,
Yeah, you can think
of
it
the
as a
of the new
diminished
key.
part. Hmm. And then it goes to like a 4 minor to 1 resolution in the key of A with the third in the bass. Now, obviously, the connecting idea of this is just that they're tenths moving down chromatically. It couldn't be easier. Like, it's very simple chromatic movement, but the implied harmony is E minor, a diminished walk down to the 4
Four minor,
of A, and then doing that 4 minor 1 resolution. But with the 1 resolution,
and then but one over the 3 minor.
and it does that to go back up to the 4 chord and then walks it down one last time. And that's kind of how the verse goes. It's got this tenths idea, and then that second half of it's really chromatic tenths kind of thing.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think you just call it a line cliche. Honestly, I don't think the chords are going slow enough to call them separate chords.
Well, right, but I'm just saying there's an implied
It's
harmony.
definitely implied. Yeah, I kind of hear this.
So it's like
I can definitely hear that harmony falling in there, especially with that second chord being diminished. It makes me want to let's turn it into a metal song, man, and shred over it.
I mean, yeah, so it is kind of a line cliche, or I guess you can call it under that. It's chromatic tenths.
Yeah, it depends on where you studied, probably, to what you
Yeah.
call them. Chromatic passing tones.
But I honestly haven't heard many songs that do that exactly.
Not in this manner. This is a unique way to do it. you usually see the root stay in the third move, or the third stays and the root moves. Very rarely do you see the third and the root moving, and then you really don't have the other notes unless they're in the vocal melody somewhere.
Yeah. And in this one, the vocal
And
melody kind of
the bass player
follows.
is playing that bass line, or whatever the bass line is. I'm getting it completely wrong, but he plays that walk down, just walks down those roots. So
Yeah,
they
yeah,
sound like root changes, and then the top line sounds like a third.
yeah. That's all it is. It's like it's
There's
funny,
nothing else
but
there to lead you.
yeah, it's very specific, but we're saving all the big harmony sounds or like and it's not even that big, but it certainly is big for pop music to hear what comes into the chorus,
For a 3-part vocal harmony that comes in on this chorus, it sounds huge.
Yeah.
Normally, I would expect a 4 or 5-part harmony with tons and tons of doubles and triples to sound that big.
Yeah, but this one's there. This one does do doubles, I believe, in the recording. It really sounds like, and it is Donald Fagen singing all the parts on the recording, you can tell it's his voice, but it sounds like a lot of doubles to kind of beef it up. But it is still like 3 parts. What's that?
You think he used autotune?
He absolutely did not, for sure. I've read a million things about it.
I don't think it existed when they cut this.
Well, it didn't exist when they cut this, but even later in the career, they wouldn't. Honestly, Don Fagen doesn't need auto tune. You can say stuff about his vocal delivery as he got older. He lost maybe like some of the power and everything.
I'm just trying to bait you into a hot take today, and you won't take the bait at all.
I'm just too civil today, apparently. Most days you can get me, but my goat cannot be got, I guess.
Oh man, yeah, guys. No auto tune. If you want to hear vocals without excessive auto tune, I won't say that the vocals in the '70s didn't have excessive amounts of effects on them. As you can hear from the flanger on Ozzy's voice on all the Black Sabbath stuff, and even Donald Fagen, the reverb and everything, the compression on this voice. But they're not tuning. They may be punching takes to get the best performance, but
for sure.
They're also thinking about the quality of the tape. How long? Because the tape can only be played back so many times before it loses sound quality. So you can't just cut infinite amounts of vocal takes like you can nowadays. I'm trying to bait Aaron into an auto-tune discussion.
Sorry.
Maybe we'll save that for another video. So we get a verse. So we get a verse and a chorus, and then we get another verse and a chorus.
Right, and then we get this very iconic guitar part. Yes, in which case the keyboard parts it's like the keyboard parts kind of disappear, and you've just got bass, drums, and one guitar at first. Like there's no bump bump bump. You don't have that chord, and it's like the chorus parts, but that's away, and the bass player and drums are just there with a guitar. And I actually recorded part of it too, so I can play the individual parts just to kind of like talk about it and show it, and then
let's hear you play it
so you can hear this same like the 2 parts together,
guys. And as soon as we can jam together, we'll cut a version of this for you all.
I know. I actually
this is itching to want more jam time for sure.
But so like the first part, we've got this thing where it's on a G chord, right? And the first part we have is this, or my bad. This part that goes. Sorry, a little sloppy trying to remember all the parts. But we have that first one. It goes over a G. And then when it lands on the A chord, it lands on the A here. We've got this. It's subtle, but it walks up to it the first time. Sorry. Drops it down, and we have this part that goes. So it's like 4-3-1 on A, and then it does this, which is interesting. I thought it goes 5-2-1 2. So it goes, which is kind of awkward. You got this
Very.
pull off here.
That reminds me of like something Alex Lifeson would play for Flash.
It's subtle, but what it does is it makes the harmonies like when it comes time for it to combine, you get these great
Harmonies make sense.
yeah, and parts that kind of reflect this chordal thing a little bit in the guitar harmony when the second one adds. And the second one's got this. So you got these like two like parts that are mostly thirds apart, mostly, with a couple of exceptions. Mostly like on the second chord there. When you
Yeah,
have
because
those
his
little,
voice leading skills are the voice leading skills in this guitar arrangement's pretty ridiculously good.
yeah, they're very tight
It's not
because
the Iron Maiden perfect thirds the entire time.
no, they reflect the harmony on a note by note basis. It's not necessarily directly tracking what's happening.
Yeah.
Exactly tracking it. Although there is, I guess the only part that really isn't thirds are the last part when you do the when the lower guitar goes, and on that one you have this, which is that's still thirds, but then they have a fourth together on this note and this note, and then lands back on thirds. So there's like a tiny little spot where you hear just right there.
That's funky, though. I dig that.
Yeah, I recorded where did I record it? Somewhere here, where it comes in. You can hear the. And it's, I don't know, it fits. It's nice and chill. It works like. There is one part that does a little fancy thing, which is like something to aspire to getting exactly right with it. But there's one like the first guitar part has that. There's a little quick. Just kind of like toss it in there.
You think that's a shout out to Rush, Spirit of Radio?
This is before that.
Is it before?
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe Alex Lifeson was learning some Steely Dan.
It's all kind of up in the air, you know what I mean?
It reminds me of that. That thing is very reminiscent of that, and maybe it's just the nature of the way the guitar is built. You can only come up with so many different things.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know, certain sounds, I think, in the 70s and then going into the 80s, before you're like full bore into the 80s, you know, there's a certain ear for like scales and chords that, you know, like-minded musicians are kind of just soaking up from so many sources, it's hard to tell.
Yeah. Who's listening to who? And they were probably all just hanging out together with the Who.
So yeah, there's that part, and then of course you got another great guitar solo. There's a lot of guitar solos. That's the other thing. If you're a guitar player, Steely Dan's got plenty of solos for you.
And there are some hard guitar solos on Steely Dan stuff.
Yeah.
And nothing's on the Steely Dan stuff as hard as in, oh my God, that's so fast. I'm gonna have to train for a year to get fast enough to play that. All of it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Where do you place your fingers to make that move? They're all like more gymnastic, advanced yoga type moves. Are real subtle.
Yeah, subtle, clever kind of things. Larry Carlton was with them for a number of years, and you know,
he's the master of subtle.
Yeah, of like just like I didn't. It's like wow, that's, you listen closer and you're like, wow, that's way harder than.
He plays the peg solo, right? Is that the Larry Carlton one?
No, that's not Larry Carlton. I can't remember. Larry Carlton's the one that played the Kid Charlemagne solo.
Kid Charlemagne. That's one that sounds super easy until you go to play it. Sonically, it sounds pretty simple to me, but that first position shift is even hard. That goes like 7th to 12th position kind of.
You know,
It's been a while since I tried to play that. I'm gonna bring that back up, man. You're inspiring me today. I dig this, man. I hope you guys are getting inspired.
I'm telling you, man, Steely Dan's got so much. I don't know. I'm obviously a huge fan, complete endorsement all the time. But
yeah, that Donald Fagan, send us some T-shirts.
Sure, we can buy around, I think.
Hey guys, help this video go viral by hitting subscribe, like, and share.
Tell us who you think should get this t-shirt.
I don't know why that's so funny.
I don't know.
I was trying to be serious. I want free merch.
I'm not. You should ask like an artist for free merch.
That's enough. There's the hot take. So, did you get into these back end guitar solos at all? Were you able to dig those apart? I know we didn't have a whole lot of time with a holiday going on. We're already late.
No, I didn't get any of these note for note. I didn't. Sorry.
Hey man, I think it was an amazing job what you did learning those vocal harmonies and getting the guitar parts in that harmony section together so we can take a look at that. Guys, there's a lot to look at in this song. So go learn it and show us. Yep. Send us your videos of you playing. And feel free to correct my solo at the front because I totally ruined that rhythm.
I mean, you're doing it a cappella, so to speak.
Acapella with
nice
no voices.
you know what I mean. Unaccompanied. That's what I meant.
Well, guys, that's all we got time for today. Thank you so much for hanging out. Again, we have... Oh, this way. Is it this way? I can't tell which way the camera is actually pointing.
On my screen, it's the other way, but...
So I'm supposed to point this way?
Yes.
And that points at... Right. You guys let me know which way is correct.
If I want to shake your hand, it should be like this. But if yours records it the other way, then it's going to look like we're performing some ritual.
Oh, again, guys, Randy here from Ovation Music and Studios. At Aaron King Guitar to my left or right, depending on which way Zoom bounces the camera out. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Please remember to hit subscribe, like, and share. Let your friends know that we're doing these studies. And we're going to adventure into some metal next week with some Nightwish.
Wow. Nice.